Assalamualaikum and very good day to Dr. Nadia and fellow friends. Today we will discuss about topic 13.5, which is evolution of seed plants, full adaptation to land. So the learning outcomes is to compare and contrast the differences between seeds and seedless plants, describe different groups of gymnosperm, and identify the key component of the gymnosperm and angiosperm life cycle. So what is seed plants? Seed plants is a vascular plants that use seeds in dispersal stage of their life cycle. Seed plants consist of store foods within their seed coats and sporophyte embryo. Store food and seed coats is to allow embryo to survive harsh condition during long period of dormancy, which is a rested state until favorable environment can be achieved. So when a seed germinates, the store food become a source of their nutrient for their growth. Right figure, we can see parts of seed plants, which is embryo and food store, are within the protective seed coat. On the figure, the, this figure shows that the gymnosperm and the angiosperm have two different structure in their seed. Seedless vascular plant is heterosporous plants, which the plants have microspore and megaspore. Microspore will develop to become pollen grain, or we call male gametophytes. With the pollen grain are developed, so the pollination will occur. The pollination is when pollen grain is brought into contact with the female gametophyte by wind or pollinator. When this happens, the sperm will move toward the female gametophyte through the pollen tube, and the megaspore will develop in ovule to become female gametophytes. Seed plants can be classified into two groups, which is gymnosperm and angiosperm. There are some difference between these two. So in gymnosperm, the ovule are not enclosed by the sporophyte tissues at the time of pollination. Meanwhile, in the angiosperm, the ovule are enclosed by the diploid sporophyte tissue will be developed into fruits. So we will focusing on gymnosperm first. So gymnosperm has four groups, which is conifer, cycads, ginkgos, and gnatophytes. First one is conifer. Conifer consists of 630 species of trees. Conifer are monoecious, which single plant have both female and female reproductive structure. Conifer, particularly pine trees, are well known for its beautiful and pleasant smell. Pines also have medicinal values, which they rich in vitamin A and D that can be used to ease the symptom of fever and cough. The pine nuts can be used in cooking, while pine oils can act as scents in care product, for example deodorant and perfume. We now look into the pine life cycle. So pine trees have two cones, which is the pollen cones and the seed cone. The pollen cones have microsporangium and the seed cone have megasporangium. This, the pollen sac will undergo meiosis and produce 4 microspore. Meanwhile, ovule will produce 4 megaspore, but only one will survive it. So all 4 microspore will develop to become pollen grain, which has two wings and carry by the wind during pollination. So the only one megaspore will undergo mitosis and develop into matured female gametophytes, having two of 6 archegonia. Each archegonium contains a single large egg lying near the ovule opening. Once the pollen grain reached the seed coat, it became matured male gametophyte. The pollen tube digests its way slowly towards a female gametophytes and discharges two non-flagellated sperm. One of them will fertilize an egg in archegonium, and a zygote will exist. So the zygote will mature and become the seed composed of embryo, surfoots and a seed coats. Finally, in the fall of second season, the seed cones, by now woody and hard, opens to release winged seeds. When seed germinates, the sporophyte embryo develops into a new pine tree, and the pine cycle is complete. The next one is cycads. The cycads can be found at tropical and subtropical forests and include 10 genera and 320 species of gymnosperm. So for reproductive system, cycads have pollen and seed cones on separate plants and exhibit life of gymnosperm. Pollination of cycads and pines are different, as cycads are most likely to be pollinated by insects rather than by wind. Cycads are stated to be in danger of extinction because they grow slowly.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good day everyone. My name is Naziha binti Ahmad and today I'm going to present about gymnosperm and angiosperm. So as mentioned by Amir before, there are four groups of gymnosperm, right? So two already explained and presented by Amir, and now I'm going to present another two, which is ginkgos and neophytes. So ginkgos, uh, there are only one species of ginkgos which is still exists in this which are still exist now, which is Ginkgo biloba. Ginkgos is a dioecious plant which have a single plant produces either male or female reproductive structure. So, do you remember the conifer being monoecious, right? So, recall a bit. Monoecious is actually, for example, this is monoecious plant. So, monoecious plant is a plant which have the female and male reproductive structure. So, it means like one plant have both reproductive structure. Let's say this is dioecious plant. So dioecious plant is a single plant, right? So for example, maybe this plant only have male reproductive structure, and maybe this plant have female reproductive structure, or maybe vice versa. So that's how we differentiate between dioecious and monoecious. And the application of ginkgos, resistant to pollutions, looks nice along city streets and in city parks. And then it's also improved blood circulation. Means the extract of these ginkgos can improve blood circulations. Reproduction of ginkgos is pollen tube of first the pollen tube of ginkgos burst, and then the multiflagellated sperm are released, and this sperm will swim to the egg produced by female gametophyte in ovule. Well, in short way, it's just like okay, pollen tube burst, and then multiflagellated sperm will release, and this sperm will go to this ovule. The last group of gymnosperm is neophytes. Neophytes include 3 living genera and 70 species of plant. The xylem and strobilus are similar in all species. Strobilus is actually the cones of neophytes, this one. So the cones of neophytes look similar, look alike. Next, none have archegonia. Archegonia is actually a structure that protects the egg of neophytes. So usually conifer, cycads, also most of gymnosperm contains archegonia except for neophytes. And then about the three living genera, which are Netum, Apedra, and Belvicia. Netum is a broad leaf arranged in pairs, you can see in this picture. And then Apedra it looks like a shrub with a small leaf like this. So Apedra contain apedrine, a medicine with a serious side effect. So, the side effect is like nausea, anxiety, and insomnia. So, doctor won't prefer using ephedrine during any treatment or medication because of the side effect. But if they use also, maybe they will use to prevent low blood pressure during spinal anesthesia. Spinal anesthesia um, is an injection where the doctor will give the injection exactly at the spinal to numb the nerves at the legs, abdomen, and also the head parts. Maybe for somebody they wanted to undergo any operation at their leg or like that, so the doctor will give them spinal anesthesia. So during that time, there are some patients who may undergo low blood pressure, right? So to prevent that, the doctor should give the patient ephedrine. And then Welwishia. Welwishia only two huge leaves that free. So this is Welwishia. So Welwishia, actually the younger Welwishia, it have a really green color leaf like this. But as it gets older, it's become free. It's become pudar. Angiosperm. Angiosperm is the flowering plants and the most successful group of plants. Angiosperm live in all sorts of habitats, from freshwater to deserts. So it means here, wherever you go, you can see angiosperm. Angiosperm range in various sizes, from the tiniest to the huge plants. Tiniest such as the microscopic duckweeds, where we can only observe these duckweeds by using microscope because it's so tiny. And then the huge plants is such as the eucalyptus trees, which can grow uh, over 100 meters tall, so huge. And then angiosperm also include all hardwood trees, evergreen trees, and herbaceous. Angiosperm are the staple foods. Staple foods, for example, formulation. So our staple foods are rice. Is rice, right? The rice is from paddy plants. So paddy plant is actually a type of angiosperm, a species of angiosperm. And then angiosperm also encodes within diploid tissues and develop into fruits. So angiosperm is a flowering plant. So from flower, it develop into fruits. And then the application, clothing, food, medicines, and commercial products. So clothing such as the cotton cloth made from cotton plants, and then the medicines such as sunflower, which we use during in our cooking, right? For our cooking oil, sunflower oil, which can control the high blood pressure. Origin and radiation of angiosperm. Plants usually decay before being preserved, leading to incomplete fossil record. So, because some plants may be decayed or maybe eaten before we can preserve them. So, it's quite difficult to preserve a plant compared to animals, because animals they have bones and teeth. The earliest known angiosperm is Archaeopteryx lionensis, which discovered 135 million years ago during the Jurassic era. And then the fossil, this angiosperm discovered with fossil with fruits and flowers. So actually, this first angiosperm, they get to know, like they get the glimpse of how angiosperm would be. So they're like, okay, so the angiosperm will have a fruit and a flower. Okay, it's like this. So that is actually the first, like the earliest known angiosperm. And then after that, they discovered the pollen. The pollen which can preserve well than other soft part of plants. This pollen, which can preserve well than other soft part of plants and has characteristic of marking. Um, Fossilized pollen discovered pushing origin of angiosperm back even further. So at first they discovered the first angiosperm, the early angiosperm is 135 million years ago, right? But since they get to know about this pollen, the the origins of angiosperm back even further, push the origin back even further to 240 million years old from the Triassic. Finding angiosperm nowadays is quite easy after the discovery of microscope. So botanists turn to DNA comparisons, where they compare the DNA of Amborella cercopoda, this Amborella cercopoda, and they compare this DNA of Amborella cercopoda with any plants that yet to be discovered to identify whether this is angiosperm or not, like that. The characteristic of Amborella jacopoda is having ancestral traits, and then the petals and sepals look same, so they name it as tepals. And then Amborella jacopoda also bear either male or female flowers. So as I mentioned before, if the words they bear either male or female means this Amborella jacopoda is actually a dioecious plant. And then gymnosperm abundant during Mesozoic era, however, declined at the end of Cretaceous periods. So before this, I mentioned that angiosperm is the most successful group of plants. But actually, but according to the history of plants, gymnosperm is abundant during the Mesozoic era. It means like gymnosperm are more than angiosperm during Mesozoic era. However, its decline and at the end of Cretaceous periods. Angiosperm survive and become the dominant plant nowadays. So because of that, so during that at the end of Cretaceous periods, dinosaurs decline. So due to that, nowadays angiosperm become the most successful group of plants, and the most abundant is actually angiosperm species, like more than gymnosperm. Difference between gymnosperm and angiosperm. Angiosperms are flowering plants that produce fruits enclosing the seeds. Meanwhile, gymnosperm are seed plants that produce naked seeds. The important difference is the easiest thing to remember is angiosperm produce flower and fruits. So fruits happens from reproduction, right? So angiosperm reproduce through double fertilizations, meanwhile gymnosperm does not show any double fertilizations. In order for double fertilization to occur, pollination should happen. So for angiosperm, the pollination occurs through various mechanisms, especially by insects such as bees and butterfly. Gymnosperm, meanwhile, the pollination for gymnosperm occurs mainly through wind pollination, through air only. And then the production of cones. For angiosperms, they do not produce any cones because they themselves have fruits, have flowers, so they do not produce any cones. For gymnosperms, they do not produce flower and fruits, right? So therefore, they produce male and female cones. Monocots and unicots. Monocots usually have herbaceous members. Examples of monocots are corn, tulips, pineapples, and sugarcanes. Unicots have either woody or herbaceous member. Examples of unicots are cactus, strawberries, dandelions, and beans. Cotyledon is seed leaf within the embryo of a seed which contain nutrient for plant embryo. So in order for a plant to grow, the embryo or to grow, it needs nutrient, right? So the nutrient come from this cotyledon. And then the difference between monocots and unicots. So the important thing is about the cotyledon. For unicots have two cotyledon, meanwhile for monocot only one. And then the number of petals. For unicots it have 4 to 5. For example, this hibiscus got 5 petals, right? And then meanwhile for monocots it have usually it have like 3 petals like this orchid. And then other thing is the important is about this vascular bundle. So for unicots, the vascular bundle are arranged in a ring structure like that. Meanwhile, for monocots, is like scattered. It's not arranged. It's scattered. The vascular bundle are scattered. And then last difference is the roots type. For dicots or unicots, is actually taproots like this, taproot, or in Malay we call it akar tunjang. And then meanwhile for monocots is a fibrous roots. In Malay we call it akar serabut.
Next, we are going to learn about the structures of the flower. The flower consists of four major structures, which are the sepals, petals, stamens, and carpel. The sepals, collectively known as the calyx, protect the flower bud before it opens. The sepals are usually green in color and will remain attached to the flower stalk even after the flower bud has opened. Second is the petals, or collectively known as the corolla, are quite diverse in size, shape, and color. The petals is used to attract the pollinators such as bees and butterflies. Next are the stamens. Stamens consist of two parts, which are the filament and the anther. The filament, a slender stalk, hold up the anther. The anther, a sac-like container, is the site of where the microspores is produced. The microspores will develop into the pollen grain. Next are the couple or the pistil. These face-like structures is located at the center of the flower, uh, has three major regions which are the stigma, the style and the ovary. The stigma, an enlarged stichino, is the site where the pollination occurs. The style, a slender stalk, function to hold up the stigma, while the ovary is an enlarged base that encloses one or more ovules. Eventually, the ovule becomes seed and the ovary will become fruit after the double fertilization. There are several terms of flower that we should know. First, the complete flower. The flower is considered as complete flower when it has four major parts, which are the sepals, petals, stamens, and carpel. The flower is considered as incomplete when it lacks one or more major parts. Next are the perfect flower. The perfect flower has both stamens and carpels, while the imperfect flower has either stamens or carpel. Next are the inflorescence flower. This flower is a cluster of flower, for example, the maize and the sunflower. Lastly is the composite flower. This flower appears as single flower but actually consists of group of tiny flowers. For example, the dandelion and the daisy. So here we can conclude that the complete flower is also the perfect flower as it has all four organs. On the other hand, the complete flower is also considered as the imperfect flower because it lacks one organ, which is either the stamen or the carpel. This is the composite flower, and this is the inflorescence flower. Before we learn about the flowering plant life cycle, let's take a look on the flowering plant spores. Flowering plants are heterosporous that produce two types of spores, which are the megaspores and the microspores. First, the megaspores. It is located in the ovule of an ovary in the couple. The megaspore will develop into the embryo sac, the female gametophyte, that consists of one egg cell, one central cell that contains two polar nuclei, three antipodal cells, and two synergid cells. In the embryo sac, it has a total of 7 cells and 8 nucleus. Next is the microspores. Microspores are produced within the anther of the stamen that will become the pollen grain. A matured male gametophyte consists of 3 cells, which are 1 tube cell and 2 sperm cells. The tube cell is also known as the vegetative cell, and the sperm cell is known as the generative cell. Here we will take a look on the development of the megaspores and the microspores. The development of the microspores occur in the anther, or specifically in the pollen sac. One microspore mother cell in the pollen sac will undergo the meiosis to produce 4 haploid microspores. Each of the 4 microspores will undergo mitosis to produce a male gametophyte or the pollen grain. In the pollen grain, there are 2 cells, which are the generative cell and the vegetative cell, as well as a tube cell nucleus. The development of the megaspore takes place in the ovule. A megaspore mother cell will undergo meiosis to produce 4 haploid megaspores. Eventually, there is only one functional megaspore that will survive, while the other 3 megaspores will disintegrate. The surviving megaspore will undergo mitosis to produce the female gametophyte or the embryo sac. Embryocyte consists of 7 cells, which are 1 egg cell, 2 cyanide cells, 1 central cell that contain 2 polar nuclei, and 3 antibody cells. In this slide, we are still going to talk about the development of male and female gametophyte. So, pollen grains develop within the pollen sacs of anther at the tips of the stamen. The diploid microspore mother cell will undergo meiosis to form 4 haploid microspore. Each of the microspore will form into a pollen grain. A pollen grain consists of 2 cells, which are the generative cell and a vegetative cell, as well as a nucleus of tube cell. When the male gametophyte reaches the maturity, the generative cell will divide by mitosis to form 2 sperms. The tube cell or the vegetative cell will grow into the pollen tube. The embryo sac develops within an ovule that enclosed by the ovary at the base of the couple. The diploid megaspore mother cell will undergo meiosis to form 4 haploid megaspore. There is only one megaspore that will survive at the end of the process, while the other 3 megaspore will disintegrate. The surviving megaspore will undergo mitosis to form a mature female gametophyte or the embryocyte that has 7 cells with 8 nucleus. Now we are going to learn about the flowering plant life cycle. There are 5 processes that need to occur to complete a flowering plant life cycle, which are the germination of the pollen grain and growth of the pollen tube. Second, pollination. Third, double fertilization. Next, seed dispersal. And lastly, the seed germination. So, firstly, the germination of pollen grain and the growth of the pollen tube. Actually, we have talked about this in the male gametophyte development. The pollen grain will start germinating in response to a sugary fluid of nectar. During germination, the tube cell in the pollen grain elongates into a pollen tube. The pollen tube will grow toward the ovule by the help of the tube cell nucleus. The tube cell nucleus will guide the pollen tube into the embryo sac through the micropyle, as well as control the growth of the pollen tube. The fate of the tube cell nucleus is it will disintegrate where after the pollen tube has reached the ovule. At the same time, the generative cell migrates to enter the ovary through the pollen tube. During its transit inside the pollen tube, the generative cell divide by mitosis to form 2 sperms. When the pollen tube reach the ovule, then it will discharge the sperm. This is when the double fertilization will occur. So we can say that the germination of pollen grain will happen before the pollination. Pollination is the act of transferring pollen grains from the male anther of a flower to the female stigma of a couple by the pollinator. But the growth of the pollen tube will occur after the pollination. Okay, let's talk about the double fertilization. Double fertilization means that there are two process of fertilization take place at the same time in the same place. So when the pollen tube reach the ovule through micropyle, it will discharge the sperms into the ovule. The first sperm will fuse with the egg cell to form a zygote. Another sperm will fuse with the polar nuclei to form the triploid endosperm nucleus. The zygote will then develop into the embryo after undergo multiple times of division. To summarize, we can say that the double fertilization is the fusion of one sperm with the egg cell to form a diploid zygote that eventually will develop into the embryo. Embryo is the future plant. The other process in the double fertilization is the other sperms unite with the polynuclei to give rise to the triploid endosperm nucleus. As the result of the double fertilization, we can now say that the ovule now contain the embryonic sporophyte and the endosperm. The endosperm will act as the food supply for the seed, and it will digest it as the seed mature. The ovule will then develop into the seed. If you have time, you can take a look on the difference between the male and female gametophyte, as it can help you to review what you have learned before. To complete the flowering plant life cycle, the angiosperm require various ways of dispersal of pollen and seed. The various way to disperse the pollen and seed resulted in different type of flowers. One of the flowers is the wing pollinated flowers. They are not showy because they don't have to attract the pollinator. They don't require the act of pollinator as the wind pollinated flowers disperse their seed by wind. Second is the insect and bird pollinated flowers. The petals of this flower are usually colorful to attract their specific pollinator. Third is the night blooming flowers. They are usually aromatic and white cream colored uh, flower. They will attract their specific pollinator, which are the nocturnal mammals and insects. They are another way to disperse the seed, which is by the aid of fruit. It is not mentioned here, unfortunately, but the seed is dispersed by the wind, naturally by gravity and the water to another location. Another way is the animal will eat the fleshy fruit and transport the seed as they deposit them through defecation. When the animal deliver the seeds to a suitable location, the seed will initiate the germination, and then the flowering plant life cycle will start again. Pollination can take two forms, which are the self-pollination and the cross-pollination. The self-pollination happens when the pollen is transferred from an anther to the stigma of the same flower or another flower in the same plant. For example, the pollinator will transfer the pollen from the flower of the plant A to another flower of the plant A. That is roughly how the self-pollination process occurs. So for the bee-pollinated flowers, they approach the flower for the beautiful colors of the petals and the tempting nectar. The process is when the bee approach the flower, the moths are fused into a long tube to obtain the nectar from the ovary. The bee will go from flower to flower to gather the nectar, and then the pollen is deposited from the legs, body, or the wings of the bee to the stigma of the flower, and then the pollination will occur, as well as the double fertilization process. Next is the cross-pollination. Cross-pollination is the transfer of pollen from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of a different individual of the same species. For example, the pollinator will transfer the pollen from the flower of plant A to another flower of plant B. So, for example, a male wasp pollinator are attracted to the oviparous orchid flowers which use sexual mimicry. The orchid flower look like a female wasp and also emit the pheromones as an attraction to tempt the male wasp. The males will engage in the pseudo-copulation, which is the act of mating with the flower, and end up have pollen attached to its head. The male will deposit the pollen to second flower as it attempts to mate with another flower. So that's how the cross-pollination occurs. That's all for the topic of food adaptation to man. I hope you will understand the topic. Let's have some quiz to test your knowledge on this topic.